Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're finally going to be talking about the debut album from Mick Jenkins called The Healing Component. This is one of the big ones, folks. One of the albums I've been looking forward to for well over a year now, probably close to 2, ever since I covered Mick Jenkins' star-making mixtape, The Waters, back in 2014. And he landed a song on my top 50 of that year. In the top 20. This is an MC with some serious chops, not just as one of the most potent and subtly charismatic rappers I've heard in some time, but also proving himself as a thoughtful but hard-hitting presence who was willing to experiment with poise and consideration. I might not have loved his EP Waves that he put out in 2015 that, yes, I also reviewed, but that was more because he was still testing the waters with some different sounds and styles that I would expect would be refined considerably upon his upcoming debut album. And to be honest, I'm surprised he was going to release a full-length debut at all. Like fellow Chicago native Chance the Rapper, he'd been running up considerable buzz and critical acclaim just on mixtapes and an EP alone. And considering that he's not on a major label, could have easily continued this hype until the radio finally got a clue and gave him a push, or he got a big name collaboration. But from what I saw of The Healing Component, at least from the features list, he didn't really be appearing to make that mainstream play, with his guests including BadBadNotGood, No Name, and Kaytranada. And sure, the latter two might have some hype now, but they're not exactly mainstream. But you know what? I have wasted enough of your time. This is a big one. How did The Healing Component check out? Well, this is a really tough album to analyze, because on my first few listens, I was convinced this would have been one of the best albums of 2016. The half dozen to dozen or so listens afterwards, well, it's a contender, but I find this album a little bit tough to love as much as I want to. Make no mistake, there are some individual cuts which are absolutely stellar, and some of the most well-constructed bars and verses you'll hear outside of Aesop Rock in 2016, and the production does a fantastic job matching it to create some ridiculously smooth, powerful vibes. But just like The Waters, I'd say it's a shade away from being a true masterpiece, although as a whole it's probably a little bit more consistent than that 2014 tape. So let's start off with Mick Jenkins himself, and make no mistake, I've always liked this guy as a rapper, and he's a real presence behind the microphone. His baritone has the collected heft of a man who could unleash all hell but chooses not to, making him one hell of a potent, dangerous presence when he wants to be. And I could go on about how strong he is as a rapper. His bars nearly always connect. He's got a fantastic command of the language while still remaining accessible. He's one of the few rappers who could reference Harry Potter twice on one album and Pokemon and still have all the punchlines connect incredibly well with layered meaning, and he's got the charisma and versatility to ride across some pretty experimental and difficult production. Now, one of the big criticisms I had of Waves is that while he was a great MC, he wasn't exactly a strong singer, and that he focused more on that in that EP. And yeah, to some extent, that's a little bit true here too, in that there is more singing than you would otherwise expect, but Mick Jenkins does two things to alleviate it. One, he leads into his lower, more soulful tones, which work to great effect. He sounds fantastic for the most part, and when he doesn't get his guest to handle his hooks, he also loads in enough choppy vocal effects to fit in with that liquid, ever-shifting feel of the mix. And not only does it feel cohesive, but it adds to a lot of the personality of these songs. Now, it also helps that the majority of his guest stars are really on point too. BadBadNotGood is the obvious standout, bringing in their rougher, lo-fi soul and blues touches on the album's centerpiece, Drowning, which is just an incredible track in its own right. I also liked how Ray and Lenae channeled Estelle on the Kaytranada-produced Communicate, which easily has one of the most potent, danceable grooves here. And of course, frequent collaborator theMIND, he did his thing too, probably shining the most on 1,000 Xans with this more soulful upper register that actually sounded surprisingly raw. But the bigger standout, it's No Name, who delivers a sort of effortlessly charismatic verse that really makes me wish she'd drop an actual album already and not just mixtape. She'd do a killing here. I'll admit I was a little bit less impressed with J Stock's verse on Love, Robert Horry, not quite on the same level as Jenkins despite similar content, or at the heavier autotune of the hook of Fucked Up Outro from Michael Anthony, which led to an ending that lacked a little bit of impact, and I'll talk about more of this later, but that's a minor gripe. And it definitely helps that so much of the production is so damn good here. Usually most characterized by deep, bass-heavy synths, liquid oscillations occasionally touched with organ and piano, incredibly varied percussion which even goes up to a cowbell on Drowning, and even hints of G-funk and jazz that creep through around the edges. Take the blast of horns on the title track that lead to a great infectious hook, or the distant sax creeping through the background of Strange Love, or the hollow sorts of horns in the warping groove-heavy mix on Communicate, or the G-funk gurgle control of the bass unplugged, or again, how willing they are to step into a rougher, bluesy soul vibe on Drowning that sounds unlike anything he's ever done before. And what's a little bit amazing is how much mileage this album can get as some pretty minimalist and yet experimental setups that still have a lot of real complexity. These are not easy beats to rap over. The warping and collapsing synths on Strange Love, the liquid, spacious grooves on Spread Love, the female vocal sample playing off the deeper drums on Fall Through, the cascades of piano on Angles. There's so much of a languid, watery groove on this record. You could assume that the occasional bits of choppiness might sound even better when you're high as balls. The vibes are that good. And yeah, for that for sure, I can probably buy into it, but that doesn't mean this record isn't without some instrumental issues. For one, some of the programmed percussion can be incredibly sharp on your ears, like on the title track, as seen in Bethsaida, and especially on 1000 Xans. Not bad, but they might cut through a little bit too harshly to blend all that well. Granted, for as much as this record gets cohesion through its choppy, unsettled synthesizers and vocal layers, there are points where the vocals are mixed a tad too low, which is saying something given how well Mick Jenkins' baritone will come through anyway. Finally, for as much as I dig a lot of the vibes here, just like The Waters, this record does run a little bit long, especially with the interjection of a few too many spoken word pieces that can feel a bit redundant, as well as some of the dialogues. And probably could have trimmed back to a tighter project with a little bit more momentum, because yeah, this can feel a little bit too groove heavy and a little listless at points. And this is where we have to get to the content and the themes. And here's the thing, Mick Jenkins has a few metaphors that he's hammered on for years now, especially water as truth, which you're familiar with his last two projects he has explored significantly in details, and I've talked about in those previous reviews. As such, it's a bit hard not to see his continuous callbacks to both his previous projects and recurring metaphors as a little bit of a filler. We know what you're talking about here, Mick Jenkins, but to be fair, The Water takes on a much bigger, much more contentious connotation on this album, specifically linked to love, that healing component, and by extension, Jesus and God. Yep, just like his friend and fellow Chicago MC Chance the Rapper, Mick Jenkins takes a hard right turn into spiritual material, and yet, probably to your surprise, it didn't bother me even as much as I was expecting. For one, this is not an evangelical record, thank the Lord for that, with Mick Jenkins' take on spirituality actually coming pretty close to my own point of view on this, and he doesn't shy away from hammering on organized religions on As Seen in Bethsaida, and admitting that he still doesn't have all the answers either. More importantly, for as much as he speaks about positivity and spreading the love, he's also very much aware that to spread that water of truth, he first needs to be able to love himself and know himself by extension, including his own vices and temptations, like the frustrated lust on Communicate, or the potential opulence of prosperity and the substance abuse of 1000 Xans. And I really did appreciate how he describes how the black community has fallen victim to some of its own vices, partially by muting that possibility of happiness, particularly in hip-hop, or is so cynical to hear "I'll pray for you" as insincere, like described on Daniel's Bloom. But Mick Jenkins can't entirely even blame them for that. When faced with the brutal truth of systemic inequality on Drowning, it's very easy to get dispirited and push that away, or for people to misinterpret his own messages or his own inspirations as just drawn from weed, which, yeah, he does smoke, rather than God, or get the wrong impression of his material altogether, especially when hip-hop glorifies the love of money over actual love, which rarely lasts, and as said on Prosperity, time is the only measure of the four-letter word. And when you consider how an environment of backstabbing like Unplugged, or how many of his own crew has Horcruxes, the extension of life attained through murder, it's no wonder how hard it can be to produce a Patronus, which relies on happy memories to ward off fear and depression. Now, let me stress, this is all powerful, well thought out, big idea stuff that I can definitely get behind. I just wish the ending of this album brought it all together a little bit better. Fucked Up Outro gets pretty damn close, with Mick Jenkins circling back to hip-hop as a genre. Now, he doesn't just want to share in his heart, but to inspire and help others to do the same and grow in their own art. But when the album ends with another monologue reiterating the album's underlying Christian idea and reconnecting the metaphor because he feels people don't understand it, it feels like an opportunity was really lost to really create a powerful thesis moment to really round out this complex picture, and we don't get that climax point at the really end. And really, we get the themes at this point. And considering how both Love, Robert Horry, and Angles are more about finding love, God, and fulfillment through art, and don't really name as populist as, say, fall through in some of its black power themes, especially with the very escapist hook on Angles, which I don't really think fits all that well lyrically. This album ends a little bit more slightly than it should, at least for me. But you know what, overall, I dug the hell out of this record. I doubt that the healing component is going to smash some already strong expectations for Mick Jenkins so much as reinforce them, but I would certainly agree this sort of intensely lyrical but accessible hip-hop in its production and style is supremely underrated, especially nowadays. But now, for those of you worried about the Christian subtext overwhelming this album, yeah, it's a bit more overplayed than I'd ultimately prefer, but it is well focused and framed enough most of the time to earn it. Then again, one of my favorite songs this year is Hand of God Outro by John Bellion, and frankly, I think the consideration of religion on this album is done even better. But even if you don't care about the lyrics, this album has some stellar grooves. It makes it one hell of a potent listen, and Mick Jenkins has so much personality, and really the lyrics are so well constructed, it's a hell of a listen. In other words, netting an extremely strong 8 out of 10 and a high recommendation indeed. Probably one of the best hip-hop projects this year overall, and if you aren't familiar with The Waters, easily a star-making debut that's easily accessible. Folks, definitely do not sleep on Mick Jenkins and the healing component, if only because I think people could use a little bit more positivity that's as smart and heartfelt as this. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. Got the poll up here, but really, you guys are all... I'm expecting you're all probably going to really like this album. It's got so much groove, so much smart lyrics, and really, Mick Jenkins is a hell of a rapper. If you guys disagree with me, though, or you think it's even better than I otherwise thought, I'd be happy to hear those opinions. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.